That's all set to start. Now, this panel will be casting an eye towards the future through the lens of companies that are already changing the way we live and are enabling low carbon and resilient growth. It's now my privilege to welcome to the stage Ronojoy Banerjee, corporate editor and news anchor, CNBC TV 18, to take forward this session and, of course, introduce the speakers. Welcome, Ronojoy.
Well, thank you once again, everybody. This is the final panel. I'm guessing there would be more people outside, so I'll request them to come in as soon as possible. This is really the final session where we will really crystallize the discussions we've been having over the last 2 days. And so without further ado, friends, allow me to introduce my panelists. First up, if we could request Mr. Jatin Singh to come up on stage. He's the founder and chief executive officer of SkyMet Weather Services. Jatin, come up. Now, if I could request Ms. Sandra Sassow, she's the CEO and co-founder of Ronojoy Banerjee, a UK-based firm doing great work in India. Thanks, Sandra. Thank you very much for joining us here. Last but not the least, Gaurav Sareen, the country director at Sigfox, a company that is involved in the Internet of Things. We'll find out more about what they do as the panel progresses. I'll request my speakers to please sit down. So, as I think the host told us, that this is really to focus on how there are some innovative startup companies that are doing great work. The theme of the panel really is that the way we get goods and services today is going to be very likely different from what it was yesterday and will be very different from what it will be in the future. I think we all can agree on the fact that there is a clear correlation between per capita GDP growth and per capita carbon emissions. Today, as a country like India, we grow and our per capita GDP grows. Clearly, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the environment. I track a sector called the automobiles, and I track that sector passionately, closely for the past many years. And it's in that sector where this, where this discussion has, the discussion has been largely on the fact that today India's car penetration is about 20 per 1,000 people. We are far behind countries like China. They are at 70. If you look at America, it's around 700. So a point on which I've always sparred with the auto industry is when they say that look at the potential and the headroom for growth. But I say if India were to grow from 20 to even 50, can you imagine the situation that is going to create on the roads and the pressure it's going to put on the environment? That's where now we have the Ubers of the world. And it's not just in the area of mobility. We are seeing in different areas, energy, food, where different interesting technologies are coming in and that are addressing serious issues that we face today. So, friends, thank you once again for joining us. What we'll do is, I will invite each of my speakers to, to come up here, and they will do like a brief introduction of the interesting work that they are doing. Thereafter, we'll open it for a quick conversation with the panelists, and then you guys have your apps, I'm sure, so please post questions there or just send it to one of the organizers. They'll give me the questions, and let's try and make this interactive as we can. So without further ado, if I could request Ms. Sandra Sassow, the CEO and co-founder, Ronojoy Banerjee. So you're doing some interesting work with respect to waste management. Why don't you tell us what you're doing? I think there's some slides as well.
Should I click? Yeah. There we go. So we've developed an in-building solution or next to a building solution for converting organic waste, and that can be food waste or sewage, into usable energy and water for the site. So we've put these in shipping containers. We've patented the process. The process inside the system is an anaerobic digestion process, and it allows the user to put waste into the machine, to have the bacteria eat it, and for the bacteria to create the biogas. Now, the system or the process inside is not new. It's anaerobic digestion, which has been around. What's new is the odor control and the packaging concept of really shrinking it down into something that can sit in an urban environment and create electricity, recover the water from the waste, which in places like Bangalore are really important, and give you a fertilizer component as well. And we've been hearing this entire last 2 days about urbanization and the influx of people into the urban environment. We want to look at new infrastructure. So this is new in terms of infrastructure play. You can put this in at the building level and incorporate it as part of a new strategy. So instead of thinking about expanding underground water and sewage tracts, think about making each and every building its own self-contained, closed-loop environment for wastewater and for food waste or other organic waste to be able to create electricity on site. And that's what we do.
So Sandra, currently, I mean, where are the places in India where you are working?
So we're currently working in Mumbai. We don't have a unit in country yet. We have opportunities for pilots in Mumbai, in the center of the city, taking some of the food waste. And we also have an opportunity with the government of Andhra Pradesh to electrify at village level in conjunction with the University of California at Berkeley. There's a very large project. It's in its second year, and we're looking at taking the sewage at village level, converting it locally to produce actually water, fertilizer, and gas in a bottled format.
All right, sounds great. We'll take that conversation forward. If I could now invite Jatin Singh, the CEO, co-founder of SkyMet Weather Services. It's the first privately held company to actually forecast the weather. Jatin, welcome. Tell us.
So we can see.
I think it's. Yeah, can we have the slides up for Jatin, please?
Just one slide.
So till then, tell us then.
We are a simple weather, climate, agri, and energy services company. We think that we try to do businesses in renewable energy or agriculture or any other kind of data-intensive business without having the data. And we've basically seen that we think that weather and climate data is a force multiplier. Once you have good in situ observations, and if you have a reasonably good forecasting system, then there's a lot of efficiency inbuilt in that data. Basically, if as a country, you're able to invest in a good hydromet system, it is a force multiplier for agriculture, for disaster management, for fisheries, for shipping, for logistics and transport. And in India, I personally thought that there was a big gap, and I've been filling that gap. So today we have 6,500 weather sensors across the country. We're the only people in India that are able to track every thunderstorm in real time. We've got a lightning detection system. We also do a lot of drone survey work, because when we started tracking weather, there was also demand to track terrestrial, to make terrestrial observations. And as renewable energy or city government or smart city, actually even defense, so basically these are businesses that are pulling from a platform. And what is interesting is that climate change and the impact of climate change is very tangible. And the poorer you are, the more tangible it gets, because your resource base is more natural as opposed to manufactured if you're poor. And that is a serious governmental headache, and it completely attacks our India's food security. To give you a sense, between the year 1900 and the year 2000, there was one drought per decade. Between 2000 and 2017, there have been 5 droughts already and 2 below normal monsoons. So to manage that strategy, to come up with some kind of a risk mitigation and management, weather derivatives, government policy, all of that decision making is completely data driven, and that's where we are.
Well, thanks very much for that, Jatin. If I could now invite Gaurav Sareen, the country director at Sigfox, to tell us what Internet of Things is his company developing. Go ahead, Gaurav.
Thanks, Ron. Sigfox is predominantly related to the Internet of Things industry. The panelist in the session before this, Alka from Tata, briefly touched upon the Internet of Things. And, we've spent the last 2 days talking about looking at alternate sources of energy, looking at alternate or new technologies to solve the challenges of energy, transportation, etc. We are looking at technology to approach the problem of, and in context of India, how rapid urbanization and industrialization. So we're looking at technology to address efficiencies and improvement of productivity to solve some of those challenges. And Sigfox started out about 8 years ago, so it's not a classical startup, but I think what we've managed to retain of the startup culture is the nimbleness and the hunger as we expand to different countries across the world. We today operate in about 40 countries, and India is going to be one of our biggest markets outside of North America. And so really what we bring to the table is a way to improve and enable better efficiency and productivity as more and more pressures on urbanization are created by the influx of people moving from rural settings to urban settings, and the pressure it creates on scarce resources like energy, water, environment, etc. And through the course of this dialogue, touch upon how we are enabling some of those things to become, give you a better bang for the buck, if you will, and how you stretch those resources, despite the fact that more and more people are going to be consumers of those resources.
No, excellent. Thank you very much to all my three panelists for those wonderful opening comments of what you do. And I hope the audience are now also sort of in sync with largely what they are trying to do and why we think they are the change agents. So let's just quickly throw this open for a dialogue before I throw it to the audience. And we'll try and do this a few times. Let's make it as interactive as possible. So Jatin, let's start with you, because weather forecasting has always was meant for the government or government's domain, or in the public sector. How did you develop the technology to actually do something like that? I mean, just talk to me about what happened, your early days. Who did you reach out to, and where did you get this idea in the first place?
It's a combination of things. Actually, the Indian meteorological setup is more than 120 years old. Okay, and it's one of the older meteorological setups of the world. We have been collecting data for a long period of time, and we actually have been doing a lot of good work, even in a global. So we are pioneers in seasonal forecasting. So that heritage was always there. It's something I knew about because my father is and was a vendor to the IMD. So like many big governmental organizations, there's a part of that that is beautiful, and there's a part of that that is inefficient. I was able to recognize both parts.
But didn't you have run-ins with the Indian
Well,
Meteorological
I do.
Department?
In India, if you have to do this, you have to run into government, and especially meteorological department. There is no love lost. So that was that. And also 2003 was an interesting time because a lot of television networks were coming up, and no one had, contextualized Indian weather data. So weather data for the longest time was an urban story, an American European story. But India has a very strong weather and climate dependency. That's the monsoon, the 4 months of the monsoon. The farmers, the rain, majority of our agricultural population is rain-fed anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so they live and die by the monsoon. We know that. Okay, the moment I was able to figure out that narrative, okay, and I've got tremendous of all government support over a long period of time, and I've then built my business trying to sort out issues from, one is to figure out if there's going to be a drought. But one is to figure out in a country as diverse and as big as India, where is the drought? And a drought is an ongoing story. Okay, a drought is defined differently in different places depending on what is being grown.
So how many droughts did you say just now? The opening that
five droughts from 2000 to 2017, 2 below normal, which are also almost droughts. We were, as a country, used to one drought in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Now it's coming every alternate year. And mind you, we are the victory of the Green Revolution was that we were able to master the wheat crop, which is not natural. But now our winter is not what it used to be. If you remember 2014, there were a tremendous number of farmer suicides because of unseasonal rain. And that has become a facet. It doesn't get cold enough. It is not cold for long. And then you have this hail and unseasonal rain. Hail was something, if you look at old hail maps, you would figure out that hail was a Punjab, Himachal Pradesh hill states.
Right.
You get hail all the way down to Andhra today. And that's a big change.
Right.
So how do I deal, even from a post-facto analysis, how do we deal with that? So I kind of started building that and then got into hardcore agriculture.
Sandra, waste to energy, this I think we're already beginning to hear a lot of it now. And I think it's going to become more and more important, especially for countries like India. We're seeing massive urbanization. So you fulfill a very important role. Tell me, what brought you to India? I'm sure, the potential is massive, but talk me through a little about, how you set up the company and what brought you here, and how has your experience been here so far?
Sure. So the company was set up, we're a husband and wife team. We set up the company originally as a view in the market that there was a need for distributed power generation. And we actually looked at a lot of different technologies. We settled originally on wind technology and waste technology. And we've since, 4 years ago, focused strictly on the waste side of the distributed equation. We took a view that there was waste everywhere, that waste could produce a base load amount of energy in most environments. You don't need to wait for the sun to shine, and you don't need to have a wind resource. You don't have to, by going distributed, you don't have to be limited by the grid, and the lack of grid wouldn't be a limiting factor in where we could deploy. So that was the basis of the business. We've been fortunate that there's been a huge interest in what we do, and the business seems to come to us. So that was very much the case with India. We were approached by a number of companies and and the opportunity in Andhra Pradesh was proposed to us when I was actually in California at the time. UC Berkeley is very much involved with the government of Andhra Pradesh because the professor there is originally from a village in AP called Mori. And that project is based around trying to start with first his village and then move it as a model going out. So that's really, we've been following the inquiries around the world. So that's taken us to Portugal. So we're a UK-based company. Don't be fooled by the American accent. And we're a UK-based company. We're in now France and Portugal and the United States. We've just taken our first order in Brazil. We're opening up with a partner in Korea, and we also have units going in Japan. So India for us is really a very interesting market, and we're really pleased to be here.
And how big is India when you compare it to some of the other markets where you're present?
Huge. Yeah, there's a big need here. There's a tremendous amount of organic waste. So if you look at the total amount of waste in India that's being tracked, 50% of it is organic. So if you start to take that 50% and do something with it, you can produce 20% of the electricity needs of the country. 20% of the electricity would probably be most of the household. I think it's 96% of the household needs. So you can really make an impact if you were to restructure how that works, take waste, have everybody work with it, and even at the residential level, you could offset the residential needs. So, absolutely. Maybe that then plays into the balance of energy types.
Okay, that is an untapped potential, for India, and massive upsides.
Absolutely.
Gaurav, you mentioned India also as being one of your largest markets. So tell us, and when you talk about IoT, the specific areas where you're seeing maximum traction, the areas where you're working with, talk to me more about that.
So Ron, first of all, I'd like to begin by saying that, I've been part of the high-tech industry in India for 22 years. And, India has always been at the forefront of technology production, not so much on technology consumption. And I see IoT being the first technology to democratize that, and where we will not only be producers, but also be early consumers of the technology, primarily because, like I said, IoT is essentially aimed to build more sustainability and increase more efficiencies in the way we currently deal with either utilities, or we deal with services or transportation. Coming to your point on what are the areas, I'll talk about 5 that I think are important from both from enabling a low carbon economy as well as enabling more sustainability in India. Energy, and we've talked, extensively about energy in the past 2 days. From our side, whether it's at the home, building, or grid level, we are improving, and removing inefficiencies in the distribution and consumption of energy, right? So that's where IoT will play a significant role, and you'll see, sensors and devices that will be recording real-time behavior at each one of those areas, whether it's at the home, building, or the grid level. Transportation in terms of better route optimization, intelligent transportation solutions, fleet management will all kind of come together to reduce the impact of greenhouse emissions. And so that would have a long-lasting impact on bringing down the carbon footprint, from a technology adoption perspective. The third thing is water crisis, right? And we've talked extensively about how Bangalore, as a city that I live in, is going to run out of water very soon, and that's a reality because today, and I was talking to a large infrastructure company, 75% of the water is non-revenue water in Karnataka, which means that either it is not being metered, or there is a lot of leakage, or there is a lot of wastage in the water. So technologies like ours will enable you to be able to plug those gaps in the entire supply chain and create more consistent and predictable supplies of water. And then last two areas are environment and agriculture. And both those areas, right, are so relevant as urbanization and industrialization takes root and grows in India. On the environment side, having ubiquitous sensors that can in real time, give you, action plans to manage a spike in greenhouse emissions. That's extremely relevant as an application from an IoT perspective. And then, of course, agriculture, we've got to be very cautious about the level of pesticide or fertilizer or water that we are using to improve our yields per, square kilometer or square hectare or whatever. And I think, those areas also real-time information about soil moisture levels or wind velocity levels or conditions are going to enable us to get more productive and more efficient.
Right. As we go ahead and as we think about the future, we will need more and more businesses like yours, to try and address, several issues. Jatin, as a country like India, we today have become very conscious of, of our environmental obligations, so to speak. But what is the role, funding is going to play in order to encourage, younger entrepreneurs who are trying to sort of think out of the box, trying to address issues that are central to India, trying to address issues of climate change? What has been your experience like? Do you think today, venture capital companies, private equity funds are sort of understanding a lot more about the importance of these kind of green startups, so to speak? Because, till maybe 10 years ago, the level of acceptance, I'm given to understand, was a lot lower than what it is today.
You see, it's the nomenclature that has changed. I mean, I've been around for 14 years.
Yeah.
So I can kind of, I know the story. See, 10 years ago, green startup was here and there, but what was working was clean energy, solar and wind. And green startup was something that got bunched up. Now, green startup has become the largest space of which solar energy is one part. That is the evolution that has happened. And I think as we have become water stressed, energy stressed, as a number of per capita users of, the kind of urban life is growing, we know that our old setups of big grids and big roads is not going to work. Everything is at some level going to get nuclearized. And everything has to be energy efficient. So I think that is definitely creating an organic kind of narrative to build businesses and equipment for that. And in countries like ours, which is like 1 billion people strong, I mean, take a simple thing as solar lamps. You scale a solar lamp business, and a Philips is in it. And I remember 10 years ago, there were a bunch of people doing it. Now there are so many of them. There is scale. And it actually frees you off the grid, and it is actually clean. So, the monies are there, the technologies are there. I mean, what scares me, especially on the hardware side, is that the rate at which hardware becomes cheaper. You create a business plan, and then 2 years later, everything has changed.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is the government support at the local, state, and national level is there, irrespective of regime change.
Right.
Parties, call it what you may. But the fact is that, we as a country know that we have to sort out our issues, we have to consume less, we have to clean up our air and water, we have to improve our quality of living. Now, we might not be able to do that in symphony because we are a democratic country. But nonetheless, I think the narrative is something that everybody is bought into.
In fact, we'll come to government regulations, and we're going to look at it a little more depth. But, but Sandra, tell us, because, you have more of a, you have like the global picture. Okay, how are you seeing the appetite for, for investors to fund companies doing this kind of interesting work, which today is niche, but one hopes will become more ubiquitous, the kind of technologies you're adopting in the future?
The funding market for something like my technology, which has a substantial hardware element and a manufacturable element, is still quite difficult. And I think the difficulty as a manufacturer of the technology is that our distribution or route to market is distributed. And so we don't see project finance monies around our sort of solution, because it's very difficult to bundle it as an offering into that project finance market. We can see that we're leasable, so that's quite an interesting one from the operating capital. From an OpEx standpoint, we can put leases in place. We're looking at working in the various markets, but we're also struggling with cross-border types of solutions. So where we come to a new market, which India is a new market for us, we have to then engage with local finance routes, and that makes our access into a market slower. So it's unlikely that a UK entity would do local distributed finance for us, for example. And it's probably as unlikely that an Indian bank who's engaged with us here would do something with us in Brazil or Ghana or South Africa, where we're also active. So we're seeing compartmentalized funding is what works with us, and it makes it quite challenging as a young company.
And how has it been your experience now in India, being able to tie up with some local sources for funding?
We've been trying to fund a project in Mumbai. The issue for us is that we're coming in as an external technology. We're viewed as an unproven technology, so we just heard how we want new tech in the market, but we also want proven tech with a 10-year track record, which is sort of they don't go alongside each other. So for bank finance, we generally won't be successful. And the biggest issue for us is generally customers here want to pilot initially and then do a rollout. And so that funding stream is quite challenging for the initial pilot, which we still need in our case.
Gaurav, what has your experience been on this?
On the funding side?
Yeah.
So actually, I think there's a couple of things that I would like to set the context. First of all, I think artificial intelligence and cognification is an inevitability. So everybody is looking at artificial intelligence as the next wave of startups, right? And so that's inevitable as the cost of sensors. To give you an analogy, from the pre-industrial days to when electricity was discovered, we are at a stage where what we did with manual machines when we electrified them is today we will take those electrified machines and make them intelligent, right? And so much like electricity, artificial intelligence will be ubiquitous, it will be in the background, and it will be on demand. And you can switch it on and off as we need. So that's inevitable, and that's, I think, gaining a lot of traction and mind share with the investor community, with the policymakers, with the market and the consumers in general. I think from a technology perspective, what we bring to the table is truly the only global network for any kind of connectivity, right? Whether it is personal area, local area, or wide area. Right. Sigfox is building a global network, which implies that whether your device is connecting to the network in India or anywhere else in Asia or Europe or North America, it is the same network. So there is no roaming, there is no configuration, there is no setting change that you need to do.
Wow, how is that going to work? Tell us a little bit more.
How is that going to work?
Yeah, how is that going to work?
Well, that's a long discussion, but in a nutshell, what we're trying to achieve is that Sigfox as a company underwrites the SLAs for all of our operator base across the world. And we hold them accountable to the same level of service and quality of service across the base. And then what we do is all of the backend is common, is the same backend that all of the data travels to, because that's how we've been able to manage the economies of scale and bring down the cost of these networks to a fraction of what exists today, right? And so that's truly how we are kind of going ahead and deploying a truly global network.
Let's talk then, also about the role of the government in this, and perhaps maybe you could start, Gaurav, and then take it with Sandra and Jatin. The government here in India has, of course, been focusing a lot, and since you're talking about technology, IoT, and all that, we have new slogans. Different days we have different slogans, and clearly, Digital India has been one of the flagship programs of the government. But give us an honest account in terms of the openness of government to embrace these kind of technologies.
So, and I'm saying this not because I'm sitting on stage and, it's a good thing to say, but I have seen, a very, very positive, very proactive face of the government. I've been working with the regulatory bodies. As you can imagine, the telecom is a regulated market in India and elsewhere. And so I've been closely involved with the regulatory body and the Ministry of Communications. And I've seen them being extremely proactive to acknowledge and recognize that dedicated M2M networks are important. And so we will very soon see an amendment to the National Telecom Policy, and which will discuss about M2M networks specifically and lay out a framework for that. On some of the larger initiatives that the government is driving, we've seen the International IoT Research Collaboration Center being set up to draw in external investment. We've seen projects, and smart cities is a classic example of the government's intent to move towards a connected, more intelligent ecosystem. Similar opportunities on what the National Highway Authority of India is doing with intelligent transportation solutions and what we're seeing on the grid side, right? So all of these are kind of initiatives that have been set into motion. Of course, everything takes time to fructify.
Would you say we have the most tech-savvy government today?
I will, though I'm not an expert on having worked with previous governments, but given my experience with this one, I can definitely endorse that view.
Okay. Sandra, since you're working so much in Andhra, the state of Andhra, when you came in, surely, here, you would have met local municipality, local government, and they may not have really known the kind of work you've done in the past. What has been your experience like? And if you could highlight also some of the regulatory challenges, if any, that you may have faced.
Sure. Yeah, we've been welcomed actually by the government, and there's been a real open approach to looking at helping to create a business model that will work. There's an interest in moving to this clean India, which is where we fit into the mix. And the government is very much engaging with us. So whether it's the mayor's office in Bangalore, where I met the mayor, or the chief minister in Andhra Pradesh, we're very much being hosted and welcomed, and they're looking at the type of solution that can come to the space and how it will improve and how it will fit in the overall mix of technologies.
Right. No, fair enough. Jatin, I started out by saying that we will need more such technologies, more such companies. Do you feel somewhere our regulatory ecosystem is aligned to sort of, nudging, encouraging that kind of innovation?
Okay.
14 years ago, you set up the company. You would have seen, like as you were telling me, the change you've seen in terms of the government's, intentions and attitude. But are we sort of ready? Is the system also geared in kind of?
The system is geared and not geared. Okay, India is a difficult place. I mean, at the end of the day, regulation is a reflection of us. Why is it that multiple governments come, but they don't really wear off the regulatory framework? There are certain realities, and maybe we don't understand them from the outside. But India being an open system, a participant in the market has a handle over regulation. You can write about it, you can meet people, you can lobby. There is state and central level, there are the courts. I mean, if you have it and you have the stomach for it, then get into it, because at the end, I say it's an open system. If I say that the regulation doesn't work or power tariffs didn't happen, and I know I can understand that. I've dealt with why our energy grid is, why open access never really took off and states got into it. But there were some winners and there were some losers. But I don't think the government itself is ever going to make it the best possible regulation. I think it is the players, you and me, who can actually change it.
But let's put it, differently then. What are the barriers, if any, you are facing in your company, to sort of scale up to the next level?
IMD? I mean,
which is the Indian Meteorological Department. So,
you see, I have.
So, in what way is IMD?
You are illegitimate. Otherwise, from a finance point of view, there are no barriers. I have raised debt from nationalized public sector banks. I have raised debt from American NBFCs. I have equity. I have welcoming state governments. I've got Government of Agriculture and Power that I work with in Delhi. I work with all the power companies. There is really no problem as such. I think it is rather, and which is somewhat of an undertone, which you will not feel. I mean, once you go to the US, there are organizations like NCAR and UCAR and Office of Naval Research, and a lot of these semi-government organizations that work with government, create technologies, and then, there are spin-offs. In India, you have a huge scientific civilian layer that is somewhat disconnected and insulated. And when you're in energy or say measurement or material sciences or meteorology, and this is what a lot of defense startups are going to start facing, because you're going to deal with DRDO. You'll have to get through that mindset that is basically not dynamic. It's a cultural thing. That's what I figured out after a long period of time. People can come and go, IAS officers can come and go, politicians can come and go. The culture of not changing, okay, because there is no risk of non-performance, is enshrined. And the only way to deal with it is like a river running against a rock. It's continuous until you cut through it.
Sandra, tell me, like again, working in different markets, markets where you found it most challenging. You talked about Japan. You worked in so many places where your firm is doing good work. So, what can India learn, maybe let's say from a Japan or UK or elsewhere, that we can sort of take away from here? Is there some interesting anecdote that you may have that you will do?
I think what we've learned is that each market has its own regulatory framework, and that as a product designer and then manufacturer, what we're faced with is entry into each market creates its own challenges. So I'm not going to say that one is better than another, but if you give an example, the fire safety regulations around our product in France required us to add additional explosion monitoring, which we've not had to add to go into a building in central Manhattan. So the regulations can be very different, and the regulatory environment that we work with. The cost of a permit in the UK has been, I guess, minimized for small distributed technologies to fit within the value proposition of that unit size, whereas in other jurisdictions, the cost of the permitting is the same no matter what size equipment you're putting into the market. And that then becomes, the market becomes unattainable for small distributed technologies. So in our case, it would be large centralized waste processing facility. The permit to put that in place would cost the same as our small unit, but the cost of the actual equipment is 1/10. So it's not feasible to enter the market. So I think if there were one suggestion, is to look around the world at what technologies are impactful, and perhaps what's hindering them from entering the market. Whether it's a permitting process that's not realistic in terms of either complexity or cost, whether there are no regulations that are around the product, so the market hasn't adapted. We were hearing about the rail industry and different types of rail cars. But if you had an industry where the brand newest type of rail technology couldn't actually be implemented because you weren't allowed to use, plastic for the rails. Let's say it was plastic instead of metal because plastic hadn't been authorized, then you wouldn't be able to implement that new technology. I guess the same applies across the board for new tech coming into the market. You need the regulations or the certifications to adapt as new tech comes into being and is coming out of R&D.
Gaurav, your company, IoT, you're developing several systems which can be used for various applications, including for climate. What has been your experience in terms of the barriers, that you face to sort of take your business to the next level?
Great question. So I think, I'll take smart cities as an example in India. We've kind of talked about it in, all forms of media. We've kind of talked about it in all forms of forums, industries, et cetera. And one of the biggest challenges has been that it's still not become mainstream as we speak. And, one of the reasons that is so is, actually there are multiple reasons, but one of the main reasons is that A, the technology itself is in its infancy, which means that there is a lot of fragmentation that exists at every part of the value chain. So one of the things that we are trying to do differently, even though our primary or core business is to offer a connectivity medium between the edge and the cloud, we are actually going out and standardizing a lot of the edge as well as the cloud, which means that we are engaging with silicon providers, we are engaging with module companies, we're engaging with device OEMs to be able to offer more off-the-shelf devices so that system integrators that are building out these smart cities, they can bring down their costs significantly by going after commercially off-the-shelf available components. And so standardization is one of the biggest barriers that we are trying to overcome in terms of taking the next step and making IoT more mainstream in India. So that's what we are doing, trying to build more a robust ecosystem at every level of that value chain, which will make IoT become the PC market. Today, PC market, it's very easy to assemble a PC from standard components. And that's exactly what the call of the hour is for IoT. Because every company today is implementing the solution in their own different silos and different ways. And we're trying to bring about a level of standardization that will also impact costs favorably for adoption.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. So let me just throw it to the audience before I ask them specifically about technologies that excite them about when they look into the future. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. We want to know about what they've done, and we've discussed about the barriers that they have faced, their general experiences, but if there's something more specific, maybe if there's something on the app you could perhaps tell me, maybe we'll come back or just post your questions on the app if you're too shy to stand up and ask questions. So is there something that you want to? Okay, I think the microphone.
Yeah, we have one somebody posted a question that has something for everybody. So from SkyMet, the person had wanted to know what the application is for renewable energy. And from, and then the next question is for Sandra, what the how you get your waste stream down, the specific waste stream that you need. And then the next question is, what is the application in Sigfox for transportation?
So Jatin, if you could start.
One is renewable energy resource assessment, both for solar and wind. It's very tough, and one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of these plants have come up and then they're not producing enough power because there was not enough terrestrial energy that was available, so a lot of those audits. The other is scheduling, forecasting it, because it's a part of the regulation that renewable energy providers, generators, as well as I think distribution companies have to figure out how much renewable they can take or generate from a particular farm. So we specialize in generating solar or wind power forecasts from specific areas.
Sandra?
Waste is currently moved around on site, so generally people will gather the waste up, they'll put it in a particular location, and then a vehicle will come along and move it off site. What we're purporting is that you would be able to keep that waste on site, and there are a number of ways to move it. So there are novel schemes for new builds that are looking at incorporating pneumatics into the system and then piping it directly into a machine like ours. There are maceration technologies being put into new build housing so that you can macerate it directly in the sink. with low water usage or no water usage and have it go directly into a system like ours. So there are a number of ways of getting it, but the most common is to just stay with the status quo and work with either a free disposal continuing on, or maybe adopting a pay-as-you-throw scheme so that there is a methodology for recouping and just giving the electricity content back to the building, and having instead the occupants of either the commercial or the residential building pay for the amount they're disposing. So to do two things: one, incentivize them to throw away less, and also to create the business model around the unit.
Wow.
So coming to the applications that we see in the transportation side, commercial vehicle telematics and passenger vehicle telematics are our biggest applications, not only in India but globally. And commercial vehicle telematics includes everything from fleet management systems to cold storage, cold monitoring solutions, where you're trying to track the shipment and the ambient conditions related to that shipment. Maybe it's pharmaceutical products, or it's perishable commodities, et cetera, that you're trying to ensure are maintaining the same ambient operating conditions from the source to the destination. So, and then of course, on the passenger vehicle side, we're looking at asset tracking in terms of, vehicle tracking, anti-theft detection systems, geofencing, those kind of applications. In fact, we're working with a large two-wheeler company in India, where we're looking at a device that can help, the mortgage company track the device or track the asset through the lifetime of the mortgage. Just make sure that there is no default. So, the point is that as more and more of these applications show up, they will create a completely new stream of new applications that we don't definitely know are on the horizon, but we can't anticipate the kind of use cases that will arise, right? And I think we are seeing the first wave of that happening as we speak. We were doing a pilot with an insurance company where we were actually bringing in different thoughts, saying, hey, insurance of a vehicle has nothing to do with the age of the vehicle. It has to do with the behavior of the driver. Yeah. And so how do you constantly monitor driver behavior, hard braking, cornering, acceleration, deacceleration? How do you manage all of these things and then build that into your insurance premium? So these are just new ways or techniques of disrupting existing businesses. Moving away from transportation, also give you an example of industrial companies, HVACs, right? Today, HVACs, whether you buy it from a Carrier or a Daikin or a Voltas, the conversation is largely the same, right? What we're seeing is actually moving the conversation away from a CapEx to an OpEx model, where the OEM can go in and talk about actually providing you the air conditioning based on your per square feet area on a monthly services model, without having any upfront capital investment. And that can only be enabled by having the ability to constantly monitor and track utilization and usage. So those are some of the things that we see will also transform the way business models, as we understand today, have been crafted. Right?
Should I take the question? I want to understand then from all three of you, as we conclude this, what's out there? Because you're doing the kind of work. Okay, you would surely know about the kind of technologies that are out there that many of us may not even be aware of or privy to. Let's start with you, Sandra. How do you see waste management or this waste to energy, business or the potential changing over the next 5 to 7 years? Is there something, are you seeing more competitors for you, which only means that the pie is growing, there are more people interested in this? What's out there? What have you seen that, that excites you today?
I think what I like is the concept that waste will no longer be waste, but will be a resource. But then also with the integration with IoT, it starts to be able to be used as a monitoring for what's going on at city level. So as an example, if you use a closed loop system at building level to reprocess the water, you can monitor health. Or in the case of one of the countries that we're dealing with, they're looking at opioids and opioid use and how to control it. You can start to identify areas where that's a real issue, and then you can start to target programs to address that, and then monitor the viability of those programs or the effect that those programs are having. So you can start to, we're waste, right? What does that have to do with health? But actually, you can start to monitor at a much more micro level the health of the individual population centers, and then incorporate that in the health strategy at country level. So that's what excites me, is how do you go and incorporate IoT, monitoring, waste management, and everything else into urban and smart cities.
You know, the fact that waste can be energy is going to take, I think, some time for bulk of the population to sort of appreciate and understand. But are you seeing signs of that in India? Are you seeing people being, at least being into technology?
I wouldn't say it's new. I mean, people have been using waste at household level to create cooking gas forever, especially in India. And the only thing that's happened is a lot of that use has been limited by the fact that people have migrated into an urban environment. So now you can no longer go downstairs, put your waste outside, and have your little pipe come up to your 10th floor apartment or 20th floor apartment. Might not be realistic. So now it needs to be a bit more industrial and a bit more modern. And that's all we've done, is take what used to exist and really incorporate it into today's fabric, because we used to reprocess our waste locally. We used to use it as a resource, and that's gone away by this urbanization that's happened. And it's not just in India, it's around the world.
No, that's a fair point. Jatin, what excites you today?
I don't know if I can use the word excitement, but I think there is this moral imperative for our country to stop farmers from killing themselves because of water distress. I mean, if you saw the Marathwada drought of 2015, it was absolutely pathetic. There was slum colonies that came up in Bombay of middle-class farmers who had to pull out their kids. I think there is, and climate change is going to make that challenge really, it's going to make it worse. We're going to have many more dry years coming ahead. I think the only way out is by using data to reduce distress, to warn, and to organize. And especially, we need to figure out our water. And I think there's tremendous amount of support for that, both from the government as well as the private sector. And that is something that I'm pretty much, that's what I want to do. De-risk by data.
How do we, and I completely agree. I think it is a moral imperative and something that we cannot ignore. But just the way we are in the metropolitan, there is a sense of apathy also that's that's crept in. That what's happening in Marathwada, most people are not sort of directly impacted by that. How do we then, as a society, become more conscious? Because I think that might just be the building block to sort of seeing more people like yourselves, trying to do things differently, trying to address some of the critical environmental challenges. How do we become more sensitive as a society?
Don't get me wrong, okay? I think policymakers are sensitive. I think urban India is insensitive. I think policies in place, you talk to government. Government is all about rural from the word go. The urban narrative is where, 3,000 people dead because of flood in Bihar has no new space as opposed to a one-day flood in Chennai. But then that is urban India's problem. But I think the country as such is geared to it. I think the challenge is so massive, especially in a democratic setup, that there is no one way of doing it. And I think our scientific agencies need to buckle up and come up to the task, because at the end of the day, I'm a private business. Okay, but a sensing network. I'll tell you a simple thing, soil maps. We still don't have great soil maps in this country at the resolution that we need it for. Survey of India, I'll tell you, Haryana and Punjab still don't have a settled border because they don't know which village is in which state. So, as a private sector company, I actually end up solving a lot of those problems, which is strange. For example, cadastral maps. You want to compensate a farmer on the basis of what did he exactly grow and what he lost. For this, I need a drone image of the crop. I also need the cadastral map to establish ownership. Now, in Gujarat, cadastral maps are a state secret, whereas MP, it is public data. So, and as a company, my job is to, I have flown drones in Gujarat, and I have figured out that there was a massive fraud going on with the cooperative banks. And that because that in itself creates a different kind of inefficiency. The fact is that the policymakers are attuned to these things, at least at central and state levels. In terms of the urban India narrative, urban India wakes up to a shock when the party loses an election because basically farmers were upset.
Right.
It happens so many times.
You mentioned data. How do we ensure that farmers also use more of data? They are more empowered by information and knowledge so that they know when the next drought is coming, something that you're doing. How do we make it more, how do we ensure more and more farmers have access to these kind of technologies and information?
I think
or do they already?
They already. If you go to Punjab, Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan,
then why
Karnataka,
is India
Andhra,
so prone to, climate is one
you
thing,
see,
but
also
the vulnerability of...
The vulnerability is there. So one is a drought is coming. So now, okay, so I won't sow, right?
Yeah.
Now I need to be compensated.
Yeah.
Okay, how, now trust me, the mechanism for compensation is very complex. Because in India, the biggest challenge is the identification of a farmer. Majority of a farm labor is landless laborers. How do I legally can establish myself that I'm a landless laborer because I'm not location specific? Okay, a lot of the court recognizes one, the other doesn't. So there are tremendous amount of policy challenges. But it seems that as a company, for example, digitization is important. Aadhaar card is important. Some kind of land record or employment record is important. Some kind of locational data is important. So all of that over a period of time actually leads up to create an intervention that can be done at the specific level. I know states, for example, in the 2015 drought, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra was running cabinet meetings out of Marathwada, out of Latur. There was no lack of intent.
Right.
But the challenge is massive, right? You have hundreds of millions of people who have no drinking water. You can't make drinking water.
Gaurav, I give you this thing to finish and conclude by what you are seeing that excites you. Well, after that conversation, I know it's... but tell me, because a lot of work is already happening in IoT, it's becoming ubiquitous, the technology. We're seeing its application and usage across. So this is the area many would say. So tell us what excites you. What do we expect going forward?
Yeah. So IoT is one part, but what excites me most is the move of our complete society towards dematerialization. And when I say that, we see product ownership yielding or becoming less important than access today, right? Products being delivered as services, right? We see this to start with in the software world. Software companies like Adobe, etc., which used to license or sell products by version number so and so, today give it to you as a service which they charge you on a monthly basis. So I see that now extending to other aspects. Uber is a classic example because they are the largest cab services company in the world without owning a single cab. Airbnb is another classic example. They are the largest inventory of hotel rooms without owning a single hotel, right? So I am personally extremely thrilled by this move towards dematerialization because I think for the future generation, this sense of ownership, right, has to become more social. Everything has to be owned by society, which would automatically drive more, more scrupulous use, consumption, and attitudes towards that. So I think that's really exciting for me to see. I have young kids grown up, and it's a good time for them to imbibe the idea of dematerialization.
But Gaurav, Sandra, Jatin, thanks very much for that conversation and keep the great work that you're doing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing us too. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Let's hear it for our panel, ladies and gentlemen. A brilliant session.